Now I want to introduce our next speaker, Devvy Kidd. And I've known of Devvy for many years. Devvy wrote a little booklet on the Federal Reserve System, put out over 1.25 million of those. Devvy speaks on many issues. In fact, once you get on our email list, why, you'll get 6 emails a day on all the various important issues. And you sometimes say, well, what can one person do? Well, one person can have a profound impact on a nation. And Devvy Kidd, who's our next speaker, is that sort of a person. She has no organization behind her. She has a fabulous fortune behind her. But you can read her articles every week at newsreviews.com. You can certainly get her information, and you can depend upon it being reliable. So without further ado, Devvy Kidd, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Oops. Well, it's nice to see so many faces here on such an early time on a Saturday. In any event, I'm going to talk to you about vote fraud. We're all frustrated out there with what's going on, and the biggest problem that we have is getting rid of the elected officials that we have. I always try to point out about who makes the laws in this country. The people that make the laws, of course, are your House of Congress, your state legislators, your county board of supervisors, city councils. All of these people make these laws, rules, and regulations. They're going along with sustainable development. Those who carry them out are judges and sheriffs and district attorneys throughout the country. With the exception of a few, like the state Supreme Courts, all of these people are elected officials. And yet it seems like election after election after election, the same people stay in office. Well, that's what vote fraud is all about. That's what electronic machines were designed to do. If you want to carry on your agenda, the only way you're going to be able to do it is to make sure that the people who will carry it on remain in office. And those in opposition who can bring about change through being in an elected office are simply left out. Citizen candidates are far and few in between anymore. The Republican and Democrat machines, and I don't belong to any party any longer, they truly are well-greased machines. I'd like to give you some examples of vote fraud because a lot of people think it was just the election for the presidency in the state of Florida, but it really wasn't. I'm going to give you some examples here. Electronic elections seen as an invitation to vote fraud, and this was a column in the Los Angeles Times in 1989. Most computer security experts wince when they look at the electronic ballot tabulation systems that now count more than half of the American vote. Election Watch warned just before the November 1988 election. The advent of computerized vote counting over the past 2 decades has created a potential for election fraud and error on a scale previously unimagined. And there was a gentleman who was prosecuted for vote fraud cases for 18 years, under the Department of Justice. He prosecuted him for 18 years. And he said, all voting systems are capable of being corrupted. Most of them have or will simply be, because voting is the way we determine who gets in power in this country. On December 2nd of 1998 in Oroville, California, the mayor got to keep his jobs after because of 5 votes difference in the recount. And that was actually the district I ran in. And he allegedly lost by 1 vote, but they did a hand recount, which only took a few hours. But if they hadn't, a duly elected mayor would have lost his mayorship simply because the machines didn't count correctly. Another column in the Los Angeles Times on July 2nd, 1989 called Computers, Bugs in the Ballot Box. This was another in-depth article pointing out things such as a series of flawed elections in recent years has destroyed some of the early enthusiasm. Computer counts are not always accurate. In Missoula, Montana in November 1968, a programming error led to votes for Republican presidential candidate Richard Nixon being counted for Democrat Hubert Humphrey and vice versa. This was an amazing column and article, and because of technology today, most of these you can get off these newspapers in websites. The motor voter law from 1993 is a terrible, terrible law that needs to be gotten rid of. A computer analysis of Los Angeles County, and this had to do with the motor voter law, found 78,000 duplicate names out of 3.6 million registered voters, with some people voting twice in the same election. One investigation verified that pets, preteen children, dead persons, illegal aliens, including the man who killed Mexican presidential candidate Luis Colosio, were all registered to vote. California's Secretary of State at that time estimated that 14 to 24% of the voting rolls were dead wood or on the rolls illegally. 14 to 24% is a big enough margin to throw any election. Some of them supposedly get down to a difference of only 3 to 4% margin. There was another great column called the Dead Live on Voter Rolls in the Investor's Business Daily in 1996, August of 1996. And if you can locate these, and all of this is on my website, by the way. In Oregon, on June 20th, 1996, suspected local mail-in vote fraud is probed. 2 Benton County voters have been investigated for voter fraud, and a third fraud investigation is pending. All of these voters appeared to have voted twice in the mail-in and gone to the polling place to vote in the general election. Because the election results were finalized, the vote count totals cannot be adjusted to reflect those illegal ballots that were cast, especially close results usually resulting in recounts and ballot checks. And this is one of the great dangers of this electronic machines, and when you come up with different numbers, and I'll give you another good example later on, once that vote is certified, it's all over, no matter how bad the vote fraud was. May 19, 1996, in the Mobile Register, Alabama earns mention in book on corruption. When Larry Sabato and Glenn Simpson researched their new book on corruption in American politics, it didn't take them long to find Alabama, one of my favorite states. To the state's embarrassment, the corrupt 1994 elections for Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice got prominent mention in their book, Dirty Little Secrets. The Persistence of Corruption in American Politics is one heck of a book. The one in Alabama over the Chief Justice was one of 4 cases highlighted in the chapter on vote fraud not because it's unusual, the authors assert, but because it is indicative of systematic corruption in voting throughout the country. Angry Republicans contend that dirty tricks at the polls tipped the balance of power in Pennsylvania. This was another article, February 7th, 1994. Registration forms there were weak. They had a Democrat who won by 461 votes, but the Republican actually led by 561 votes at the machines. And in the end, it was Stinson's 1,391 to 366 victory in the absentee ballots that put him over the top. But they never really did come out with a final vote count. And in that particular race, you weren't talking about that many votes. It wasn't like you were trying to count 40 million votes at one time. Oregon, July 7, 1996. Registration forms weak, link in the elections. Concerns have been raised about possible voting fraud during last winter's special elections for the senator. This incident involved mail-in ballots and double voting. They never did come up with a final number. Investor's Business Daily, March 17, 1997. An article called Thief in the House and the Senate. Vote fraud, once thought a relic of the days of machine politics, is alive and well. While vote counting is now easier, electronic voting also offers new and less detectable opportunities for tampering. If true, it would be far from an isolated incident. The Voter Integrities Project's Blackwell notes that computer hackers can change the outcomes of elections and no one will know. We hear about problems like that a lot. Felons and dead people who voted in Virginia, November 10, 1998, in the Virginia Pilot newspaper. More than 1,700 felons and at least 2 dead people voted in Virginia last fall. The figures were contained in a scathing audit released Monday that cites the State Board of Elections for poor oversight of voting rolls and failure to upgrade its 10-year-old voting computer system. More than 50,000 voter registration forms filled out at the DMV under this motor voter law during the past 2 fiscal years were disqualified because of mistakes and fraud. A computer search by the Audit Commission revealed the names of 11,221 felons, on state voting rosters just that 1 year alone. Of those, 1,739 cast ballots according to their audit. Auditors said 100,539 voter applications completed at state agencies during the past 2 years were disqualified because they were improperly filled out. That is a huge number of voters. This is just a minuscule sampling of the stupidity of the Motor Voter Act. And in the same article, Southampton Roads led the state in illegally registered felons, 2,592. 1,402 Virginians who had died prior to the election were still on the rolls, and somebody used their name to vote for them. 144 of them rose up from the dead twice to cast their votes. It's frightening, really, and it's not easy to spot unless you're looking at the bigger picture. The Virginian Pilot, also another article, November 11, 1998, possibility that felons voted in the House race. Revelations that 881 felons were illegally registered to vote in Norfolk last fall were causing state Republican leaders to question the validity of this gentleman's 11-vote victory last year in the House of Delegates race. The controversy was renewed on Monday with the release of an audit that blistered the state of elections for poor oversight of voter rolls. And here we have another set of numbers from the same state, same election. This report, concluded by the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission, found that 11,221 felons illegally registered to vote. Of them, 1,800 cast their votes. Shortly after the election, their Circuit Judge Rutherford denied Republican demands to see a list of participating voters. The judge ruled that recounts must be limited to an inspection of the ballots that were cast. On November 10, 1998, the Washington Post, more dead people on Virginia voter rolls is found. And this again covers a third audit, which comes up with a third set of numbers for the number of felons and dead people who voted once or twice. September 21, 1997, popular absentee ballots hinder tally process, and this is from the Herald News in Washington State. Complaints have recently been made in Pierce County about how absentee ballots are counted. The results of a 1995 Everett School District election was the one in question, and in the end they never did come up with a final count. May 4th, 1998, Southern Indiana man is arrested in a vote fraud probe. Indianapolis Star News, this is an article on that one. Eric Brown was charged with receipt or delivery of ballots by unauthorized persons giving or offering financial inducement to vote or refrain from voting in forgery. He was convicted. From the Post, November 8, 1996, independent daily student newspaper at Ohio University reports issues were raised about the validity of absentee and provisional walk-in voter ballots. They had to do another recount because there's no way to verify whether or not these individuals filling out these forms are indeed U.S. citizens, naturalized or born here. June 13, 1996, 7 indicted in vote fraud case in Pike, Kentucky. The Herald Ledger Frankfurt Bureau reports that 7 Pike County elected officials themselves were indicted on charges of vote fraud in the prior election. May 30th, 1995, vote fraud in Parlier, California, from vote abuse rampant in the San Diego Union Tribune. A city council candidate was convicted of voter fraud after going door to door in a November '92 race with absentee ballots and marking their ballots by himself. California is only one of 5 states that does not require persons voting to present any identification, which of course is lunacy. It opens the door for all kinds of fraud. November 1998, the National Center for Policy Analysis, Justice Department's role cited in voter fraud. Critics charge that the Justice Department, aided by the 1993 motor voter law, is encouraging vote fraud in many states. At least 12%, here we have another number, 12% of the names appearing on California voter rolls aren't even eligible to vote, but the Department of Justice has consistently blocked the state's efforts to cleanse and purge the list of people who have moved, died, or can no longer vote in an election. January 13, 1995, Boss Tweed intact. This is the New York Times and a great article by a man named Ronnie Duggar, who's done so much work on this issue. When New York City replaced its ancient mechanical voting machines with computerized electronic ones, it thought it would be secure against the kind of fraud that has been a staple of urban politics long before Boss Tweed. Instead, the city has succeeded in demonstrating that such a system is inherently vulnerable by insiders at private companies or the Board of Elections itself. And you can do a Google search for Ronnie Dugger, D-U-G-G-E-R. His columns are quite intense. November 24th, 1998, Modesto, California. This was a report by Jennifer Ramp, Channel 3 News, which I myself viewed on television. Measure M in Modesto was supposed to pass. It was a local measure that was very popular. It didn't. However, I shipped a lot of my vote fraud booklets, Blind Loyalty, to Stockton and Modesto area. So the people down there demanded a recount. Right on television, everybody saw in the nightly news, while they fed the cards into these so-called great machines that were accurate, that were tested. We watched the feds, the FBI came in and did the test. They fed the cards into the voting machines and watched them flip-flop every few votes against the measure. They finally gave up because they could not get an accurate count after 500, so they did a hand recount. Measure M passed, so they did another hand recount of another measure that was supposed to pass, which allegedly lost, and so those two measures did pass. But if it hadn't been for the citizens themselves demanding a recount, those measures would have gone down, and the people in that community who really wanted it would have been denied everything, you know, that they had worked to get passed. And let's see, November 1998, in the very important race, Ensign versus Reed in Nevada. And of course, we all know who Harry Reid is and how he's become, you know, the champion mudslinger back there at the big brothel in Washington, D.C. Ensign was the challenger to Reid. He allegedly lost by 0.1% out of almost 500,000 votes cast. The original count on Election Day reported Ensign had lost his race for the U.S. Senate by 459 votes, but somehow, somewhere, another 193 votes suddenly showed up in Washoe County, which brought the margin down to 401 votes. Additionally, 3,200 absentee ballots that were mailed out remained unaccounted for. And the election results were certified on November 25th by the Nevada Supreme Court, allowing Reid to win by 401 votes out of over 430,000 cast. However, on December 9th, 1998, Ensign conceded defeat by this margin of 401 votes because he had the media against him, he had the machine against him. They were burying this poor man and all his supporters. In the end, of course, Reid is serving in the Senate. Other bones of contention in Nevada during that particular election, the failures of the Washoe County officials to verify the accuracy of the optical scanning system, which failed during 4 post-election tests. These were extensive tests done, and they failed, they failed, they failed, they failed. But they went ahead and held the election anyway. In one of the tests, the system counted 304 votes for one of the candidates when only 7 ballots had been cast. Failure of the Accuracy Certification Board to oversee the hand counting of 6,000 ballots, some of which were counted by people pulled randomly off the street who weren't even registered to vote, made it very insulting to the candidate. Failure by the Washoe County's Registrar's Office to explain a continuing discrepancy in the number of votes cast is just shameful, and it's going on all across the country. The conciliation log indicates that 71,734 votes were cast, but the Registrar's Office also reported a figure of 72,376. The Secretary of State's office reported 71,650. How about 393 blank votes in Washoe County that were never verified? So who's a winner? I don't think they ever knew. There were questions about the printing and counting of the remaining 70,000 ballots cast that remained unresolved. To add injury to insult, according to John Beverly, a member of the Accuracy Certification Board, it was impossible to watch and verify the tallying process, which took place in a number of rooms over a 28-hour period. And yet the Nevada Supreme Court went ahead and certified that vote. I might add, of course, that these people, Reed serves in an office under a law that doesn't exist because the 17th Amendment was never ratified. But in a very, even if for the sake of argument that it was, I mean, this is a critical, critical seat in the Senate. The Senate ratifies treaties, Supreme Court justices, they have the power to remove bad federal judges, which they, quite frankly, don't have the courage or the stomach to do for the last 100 years. It is all important. July 19th, 1998, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the Clark County vote, how secure is it? And this was quite a long article, but I'll just give you a few little bullet points. In July 1996, a public test to certify Clark County's Sequoia Pacific machines for early voting was conducted. During the test, a cartridge malfunctioned. Also, the examiner had difficulty casting his own vote. He had to vote 51 times rather than the designated 50, which is not an option that's not even offered to the voters, and the totals still did not come out correctly. In addition to its uncertain accuracy, according to the Review-Journal, due to an especially close race in one assembly district, the election was rerun twice, a situation which would not have occurred had paper verification been possible. Assembly District 1 was decided by a 6-vote margin, but the outcome was placed in doubt by 40 separate voting errors. A technician removed thousands of files from the tabulation sector of the program during the vote count to speed up reading of the count. Peter Newman of the Stanford Research Institute is on record as calling computer voting technology so vulnerable to manipulation that essentially nothing is impossible when it comes to the fraudulent misuse of the machines. Sequoia Pacific refuses to permit their source codes, which is used for tabulation, to be checked by outside sources claiming proprietary. The corrupted courts in this state have upheld this kind of nonsense. All the elections, every single phase of them in the state, in all the states, are paid for by the taxpayers. We have the right to know all of this information to verify the integrity and accuracy of our vote, but we don't have it. The courts have sided with the machines, or excuse me, the campaign donations. June 17, 1996, National Review, Vote Fraud in America, Early and Often. On Election Day, 5 men show up at a post office carrying luggage. Their bags are stuffed with 1,100 ballots, which will constitute 20% of the vote that day. Is the scene Guatemala? Honduras? In destitute Greene County, Alabama, democracy is practiced strictly third world style by the local Democratic machine. Races are stolen here. There's no two ways about it, says the Greene County Independent newspaper. It's a very long column, and the figures that they give are just staggering. April 1998, the Carmel Pinecone, it's a newspaper in a very affluent area of Northern California, ran a story titled Vote Fraud, Simple as 1, 2, 3. Our esteemed Secretary of State at the time, I call him Mr. Do-Nothing, Bill Jones, ordered the local county district attorney to prosecute the newspaper publishers for registering to vote Sandra L. Claus, Kirsty Wild, and Paul Miller, and they were all to be charged with vote fraud. Why did these courageous individuals do what they did in registering dogs, cats, Santa Claus, and others? Because vote fraud is epidemic, and they know it. Elections are being won and lost because of illegal voter registration and rigged electronic machines. Another column, October 11, 1998, vote fraud is easy, and it's here. This was in the Mobile, Alabama Register, another lengthy article. The Register sent in 5 mail-in postcards, voter registration applications during that summer with bogus names, fictitious Social Security numbers, and made-up telephone numbers. All 5 were successfully registered as voters in Mobile County. Registration officials say they're not surprised since the 1993 motor voter law made registration easier than ever, and the potential for abuse is incalculable. November 1st, 1998, it was revealed that in the district of Fred Keeley, 27th, Northern California, the Monterey area, listed 16,000 fictitious voters where no addresses were found, and this was only 2 days before the general election. July 25th, 1998, the Charlotte Observer, recount said in GOP primary for the Georgia governor. Georgia's top election official officer ordered a recount because he said that computer problems occurred that probably altered the vote account. Sacramento Bee, November 10, 1998, 7 days after the election in Downeyville. A second chance to vote? Why? Because the candidates' names didn't appear on the ballots. And I'll go into that. Same thing happened to me in one of the large precincts when I ran. And Denver Post, this is one of my favorites because I lived in Denver at the time, or in Lakewood, which is a suburb. Election Day, November 8th, 1996, the Denver Post headlines: 50-year-old voting machines inaccurate. Denver's election chief warns the machines are breaking down and no longer count votes accurately. Our current system is not accurate. We're beginning to see a significant failure rate that if candidates were to end up within 50 votes of each other, it's possible the machines can put the wrong candidate in office today. So that's what they were telling us voters before we went to vote that day, that their machines they don't count accurate. At that time, Wellington Webb was the mayor, and he said that the city has other priorities right now. They couldn't spare the money for accurate ballot machine. I can tell you what the two priorities were. One of them was to get the new Pepsi Center built. They could bring in their sports teams. The other one was to make sure that Denver County and the city had enough money to be able to honor their same-sex medical and all of that for their employees. That was his two top priorities at the time. August 25th, 1998, Diane Rhodes, who's a CPA up in Washington, cited another particularly disturbing race. In 11 races with incumbents, 11 incumbents ended up by chance in the #1 position on the ballot, which according to a campaign worker attracts automatic 20% of the vote. What is the statistical chance of this happening? It's about 1 in 15,000 years. It's unbelievable how these incumbents all got on the top so that the voters, by the time they got to the bottom, didn't pay any attention to it. There's a real art to this, and I learned this when I ran for Congress. What happened in my race when I ran for Congress? I ran on an independent ticket the first time because I knew I couldn't beat Herger as a Republican, but I knew I could beat him the second time around. But it was it was an absolute joke. However, in my first run, I received the most votes of any independent in the state of California, the highest for any person who ran for Congress in the state on a third ticket. I did in 1994. I knew I could beat him in 1996. However, that was not to be. I ran a first-class campaign. There was no mudslinging. There was no polling done by any media in the 2nd Congressional District, which is unheard of. The media absolutely stayed away. That district was completely against NAFTA. 87%, they did poll on that. 87% of the district was against NAFTA, and yet Herger lied. He told everybody in the newspaper he wasn't going to vote for NAFTA, and he turned around and he did, and they wanted him out of there. We polled 2 weeks before the campaign, or before the primary. In 3 of the locations, Herger was 5% ahead of me. 5%. One location was about 7%. 2 days after the polling, we direct mailed 35,000 pieces of campaign literature to registered Republicans in those precincts where he was 5 to 7 percentage points ahead. In all honesty, the response was so overwhelming I didn't have enough volunteers to handle it. People were absolutely delighted. I had 2 weeks before the primary, I spoke in Plumas County and was introduced by the district attorney who told that county Herger had to go. I was completely endorsed by all of these people. However, at 1 minute after 8 on primary night, the election was over. At 8:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Pacific Standard Time, almost 1 hour after the polls closed, all the media in my district broadcast the same numbers of the final vote tally. Now, they announced the vote tally at 8:01. Herger won by a landslide, 86 to 14. That was 1 minute after 8. We taped everything. By 9 o'clock p.m., it was 86 to 14, with 4% of the precincts reporting. This means reporting. They aren't counting the ballots. They're just reporting and telling, because the ballots have to be escorted to the county clerk's office for counting, at least up there. By 10:30 p.m., it was 87 to 13. By 10:35 p.m., it was 81 to 19. By 11 p.m. it was 86-14. By 4:13 in the morning it was 85-15, and by 6 o'clock in the morning it was 86-14. It never changed. With 96% of the precincts reporting at 4:13 in the morning, Herger was declared the landslide. At 11:45 p.m. that night, boxes and boxes and boxes of ballots were being brought to the Shasta County clerk's office for counting. They hadn't even counted them yet, and yet Shasta County allegedly lost 86-14 with no ballots counted. It never changed. It was exactly the same. In the blink of an eye, the Associated Press called with uncanny accuracy all 52 House seats in the state of California, and they weren't off at all. Now, I'll tell you, these are some winners and losers. All of the winners voted for NAFTA. They were all incumbents. They're all for GATT, and all of the losers, like me, were against it. But check these numbers throughout. These are 11 House seats in California. 85-15, 81-18, 85-15, 81-18, 81-18, 81-18, 86-14, 81-18, 86-14. There's 165,000 precincts in the United States of America. We hear so much about exit polls. There aren't enough exit polls workers in the United States of America to cover all of those precincts. It is an absolute joke what's going on. The whole process is absurd. And in fact, in Butte County, which is the largest county in the district, I was legally on the ballot. I was registered with the state, the Federal Election Commission, everything. The largest county in that district, my name wasn't even on the ballot. And they refused to do anything about it. I went to the Secretary of State. I went to the fraud elections. The Secretary of State, Mr. Bill Jones, said if you don't like the, he put it in a letter form. He said if you don't like the outcome of the election, go ahead and sue the state. On November 2nd, 1998, the night before the general election, abcnews.com posted the following. This is the night before the general election. Earlier tonight, during the testing of abcnews.com's site, we inadvertently posted results and erroneous predictions on the outcome of tomorrow's elections. There was no bias intended by what we posted, and the predictions do not reflect the reporting or news judgment of NBC News. A complete analysis of all the results posted and the final totals reflect that ABC News was off 0.0174%. What would you say the odds of that happening are? Are they good predictors? The morning after the election, the Sacramento Bee carried another example of fraud. They reported that Barbara Boxer beats Fong for Senate, for the United States Senate. The major television networks and the AP declared Barbara Boxer the winner shortly after the polls closed, based on exit polling by Voter News Service, VNS. She was declared the winner after 6 minutes after the polls closed. Even though Fong led at times, the network stuck to their guns, and she ended up winning with the same numbers that were called at 8:01 p.m. by Peter Jennings. It doesn't seem to matter how many people die or move out or change their votes or in the counties. The same people get voted in over and over and over. Citizen candidates, they simply don't stand a chance. I know Haskam give me a 30-minute warning here. I have tons and tons of articles. Here's another one. Hundreds of felons cast their votes illegally. 445 Florida felons voted illegally in that race. November 2008, voter fraud and motor voter fraud in Miami-Dade, another horrific example. Hundreds of ballots were rejected in Galveston County, or this one's in Galveston County in Texas. Another example of ballots that were rejected that shouldn't have been, ballots that were accepted that should not have been. Multiple voting in Milwaukee, huge investigation out there. And in this one, let's see here. This list I'm going to read was given to the district attorney in Milwaukee about what went on in some of the races. And these are recorded as incidents. At the Marquette, students were seen taking 10 or more ballots at a time for their friends. Ballots were taken out of the polling places for marking. Individuals entered the voting place with more than one addressed envelope and asked which one would allow them to vote in which particular location. They had multiple ballots they wanted to cast. A voter was asked by another voter to vouch for her residence in the ward. He said he wouldn't. The woman appealed to another person in the line of authority, and the other person said that it was okay, it was his roommate. A voter was told that she had already voted upon arriving at her polling place. She was asked to sign an affidavit verifying who she was and refused to do it. Ballots were left unattended in some areas of Milwaukee due to a broken down truck. In my race, a lady called me the day after the pretend election, and she never did tell me she voted for me, but she was very upset. She'd been a precinct worker up in Modoc County, where I should have taken that county by a landslide. She'd been a precinct worker for a long time, but she said, Mrs. Kidd, she said, I want to tell you what happened last night when I got there. And she goes in at 8 o'clock when the polls close, helps clean up. The ballots are supposed to be in sealed boxes. They're not supposed to be touched until the deputies take them to the county clerk's office for recording. When she walked in the back room, the ballots were all over the tables. The boxes, the seals were broken. And she asked what was going on, and they just told her to shut up, mind her own business, and go back to work. And I asked her if she would be willing to testify to that, and she said absolutely. She said that, you know, this is not the way to do it in elections, and she's right. I would rather have lost, the elections for the people rejecting the message that I had to bring than be cheated, and I know that I was. Here's another column. Manufacturers admit voting machines are unreliable, and this is in the state of Illinois, where they really got into a good investigation into it, but yet their legislature said, oh, that's okay, we're going to use them anyway. Here in Florida, a Democrat had a vote-o-matic machine in his car, and he was caught voting all of these ballots for himself as a candidate. This was in 2000. In 2000, the Boston Globe had a huge column about immigrant voter surge. They went ahead and hurried through INS, 1.7 million aliens for citizens, so they registered them all to vote Democrat. I mean, this kind of trickery doesn't do anybody any good. And I always skip forward here to the year 2004 presidential elections, just to give you a few more examples. This has to do in Florida, because it was so easy to catch them. In Collier County, the voter turnout was 127,409. 128,352 cast their ballots for president. In Duval County, voter turnout 379,257. The actual vote count was 379,614 voted. Turnout 3,446, Glades County, 4,188 votes cast. Highlands County, 33,996, 41,491 votes were cast. Lake, that's Miami-Dade County, 716,574, but 768,553 voted. Okaloosa County, 89,485, but 89,707 voted. Orange County, 386,104, but 387,752 cast votes. Leon County, 136,229, but 136,314, so that one was kind of close, wasn't so obvious. Volusia County was a bad one, 209,052 votes turnout, and 228,358 votes were cast. And then there's just incident after incident after incident in all of the counties, and it went on all across the United States. And you say, how can this continue to happen over and over and over? It does, because of the machines. They contain internal modems. They're too easy to program from long distances. Most of them have no accountability in them, and quite frankly, nothing's going to change until we get rid of them. People like me, although there were people who didn't think I should be a member of the House of Representatives and wanted to vote against me, they simply don't pay any attention to what's going on. When you have a candidate in San Diego County and you have a seat in Placerville County, the person in San Diego, the voter, isn't paying attention to the House seat in Placer County. They're not. They're paying attention to what's going on in their district because the person who's going to represent them. And that's how they get it done in these big, huge states. But when you sit down and go through all of the votes, all of the candidates, they then see these huge discrepancies in numbers. In Herger's last race in 2004, the same thing happened as in 1996 when I ran against him. And incidentally, nobody runs against him since I ran against him. I had the best chance of beating this guy. They wanted him gone. And now he runs unchallenged every time because he gets the same vote every 2 years. Every 2 years. It's unbelievable. And of course, that entire county is all machines. But once you put these numbers up against one another, you can see that there is no change in the vote. They win by the same number over and over. And what can we do? There has to be, there has to be an absolute voter revolt in this country. We are never going to get people to run for office at any level, whether it's school board, county board of education, city council, board of supervisors. They're not going to do it, because they know the machines are going to beat them every time. And believe me, a lot more people know about vote fraud than you think. It is absolutely one of the hottest topics out there. And the people in Arizona especially have done a really good job. The only way we're going to turn this around is for people to go to the city council and county board of supervisors meetings with good examples of vote fraud and demand that the machines are gone. You want paper ballots that are hand counted in front of everybody, not in some back room in a warehouse 10 miles away. That's where they sent my ballots, to a warehouse 10 miles away. Nobody got to see them. I wasn't allowed to see them. That just can't wash anymore. We have to have it so that the general population can watch. And it's not that difficult to do. In 2000, I think was the last time I looked at Canada's vote, 13 million people. Their votes were counted in 12 hours by hand. They don't have the machines that we do. You know, up until 1960, the American people didn't seem to have a problem waiting a few days to find out who was going to be the next commander-in-chief or who was going to be the next member of Congress or whatever. Now, it's instant. We have to know at 1 minute after the polls close. Who cares? I want accurate and fair elections. I don't want fast food elections where the same communists and socialists and New World Order fascists are put right back in office to take us down the road to where we don't want to go. Sustainable development, of course, is right on the top of the heap. So, you know, I encourage everybody to go to your city council, board of supervisor meetings, and demand that they get rid of these machines in your county. Otherwise, we're just going to have the same result. Did I run over my question and answer too?
You're doing fine. In fact, I'm going to say if anybody would like to ask Devvy some questions, why, we have about 15 minutes before we take the break. So does anybody have questions for Devvy?
Question? No question. Also, well, since you don't, and now we'll get off the stage, I wanted to let you know about my new project called One for the Road. We know that so many people out in America are just sitting around on a cornflake waiting for who knows what. We have to be able to reach out to them, and we don't have a free press in this country. The only time you have a free press is if you own it. And so I have taken it upon myself to bring the internet to the commuter, the long-haul truck driver, people driving around, sitting on commuter trains, and I hope you look into it because we need to get the truth out to our average citizens out there. Question? I'm sorry.
I wondered if anyone has ever tried to sue the Secretary of State or the state where this faulty election took place.
There's lawsuits go on all the time. I mean, in this last election, it took, what, 3 or 4 months to decide the governor for the state of Washington. And in the end, the Republicans conceded. But, you know, I gave you some examples. In some cases where they had the Office of Voter Registration and then they had the accuracy boards, they come up with 3 different final totals because of the machines. And it's not that difficult, like I said, to hand count them. One of the things they need to do, and this can only be done by your state legislatures working together with your city council and county board of supervisors, you need to break down the precinct numbers. You don't need to have a precinct with 75,000 voters. You can have a precinct that has 20,000 voters in it. Make it bite-size. And also, Americans have to get out there and become precinct watchers at the night of the vote to make sure that the kind of stuff that went on in my race, and it's going on all across the country. That headline in the Denver newspaper, that happened to be the year of a very important race for the House of Representatives. Patsy Schroeder Comrade Schroeder, was leaving the House, and this New World Order, Diana DeGette, was running against a very constitutional Republican. And she won by 4 or 5 percentage points. And with the announcement that the machines were not counting accurately, we tried to get that Republican candidate to do a hand recount, but he didn't have any money left in his campaign coffers. Believe me, it costs a lot of money to do a hand recount in a congressional district, about $200,000. And if you're going to go to court, it's tens of thousands of dollars to fight it. And if you're not the favorite, anointed one of the two machines, unless you're independently wealthy, you just shrug your shoulders and go home. Sir?
Your litany of applications of reality is very impressive. Is it possible for us to get a copy of that somewhere?
I only got through like half because I'm known for being a talker, but yes, I'm going to post it on my website.
Because in making any presentation you are...
Oh, I didn't even get to the last couple of elections. I've got more. It's once you start looking, like I said, if you go into your own state and you just do the House seats, the Senate we already know, but do your House seats and do your legislators, you'll see that their election numbers, they never change. It's unbelievable. Sir?
If we want the state of California to evaluate each of the voters and make sure they are citizens and legitimate, we have to go to the legislature. That's what my Board of Elections says. And they're the ones who like the way the election is going. So they're not going to allow us to verify whether each of these voters is truly a citizen and so forth.
Well, you know what? They're wrong. Because on April the 4th, 2000, or April 4th, 1998, excuse me, I only remember the date because I had to put my doggie down 4 days ahead of that, and my eyes were so puffy from crying. I spoke for the Republican Women's Caucus at the San Ramon Country Club, and unbeknownst to me, the registrar of voters for that Contra Costa County was sitting right in the audience listening to me. And he was so upset by what I presented then, which isn't even as much ammunition as I have now. They spent almost 2 years purging their voter rolls. And they found that 18% of their voter rolls were deceased people, illegals, and people who had married, didn't change their names or changed their name. They purged thousands and thousands and thousands of voters off the rolls. That's more than enough to throw an election. But they did it internally.
Well, I know that, but to have each voter prove that they are a citizen. See, when you register, you don't have to prove that you're a citizen.
I did a long time ago. I had to present a certified birth certificate. And that's what we need to do. First of all, we need to put the heat on this county board of supervisors and your city council. And you tell them, look, we do not know who's getting elected. These elections are fraudulent. These machines are fraudulent. And the voting rolls themselves are tainted. Just the time between elections is 2 years. That's 2 years that somebody has the time to get themselves down to get registered to vote with their proof of citizenship. I mean, it can get done, but you have to have the desire of the voters to put the heat on your elected officials. Remember something else. Town hall meetings are coming up. They're going to be all across this country starting in January. All of these candidates hold town hall meetings. When I ran for Congress, I had my volunteers outside every single town hall meeting, no matter what the office was, handing out my blind loyalty booklet on vote fraud and my bankrupt America. We gave them just to people going in. And it used to bug the heck out of Herger because he knew people were sitting there reading it while he was trying to give it. Well, the one time he showed up. We were scheduled for 5 debates. I debated him the first time. He ducked back to D.C. the other 4 times. He never showed up.
You mentioned something about these machines have internal modems.
Yep.
What's the significance of that as far as...
The significance is that, and there are some, in here I didn't get a chance to get to them, but a centralized machine in Washington, D.C. or Florida, it can dial in to the system here in California without anybody here in California at the precincts or even in Sacramento knowing that that dialing is going on. Those, and I can give you some tons of other examples in California. In Mendocino County was another one where they had the machines. And at that time, Sequoia Pacific and their representatives were in Omaha. They were controlling the machines during that vote. And in Mendocino County, they put the cards in, and every 5th vote was for the incumbent. But that's what it is. You can dial, computers can dial into these machines and change the vote, and nobody knows what's going on. And even if there's a piece of paper coming out, all of it's programmed internally, and that is the danger. And like I said, Ronnie Duggar, he has done some amazing research, as a man named Dr. O'Halloran. His research on the internal modems and how you can, have a machine in one state, a system, a computer system, just put out these numbers to all these machines. It's unbelievable. Sir?
Just a question based on what he said over here. With hackers being capable of doing so
Yep.
much these days, what...
Nothing prevents it.
I mean, a reverse type hacker situation.
I'm not sure we're that organized, although it's tempting. Do you have a question?
Can you comment on with allowing paper printouts to constitute electronic voting? Does that diminish the risk considerably?
They say that it does, but in some of the examples that I have here, they don't make any difference. When they do the actual hand recount, the total comes up different. This is the hand recount with a paper ballot. People can, mark. So you put them there in the box, and at the end of the night, and for the next several days, in front of everybody, it's not real hard to miss that X. But since 1960, this actually started in 1960. Somewhere on my website is the report from the Louisiana State Senate. Their legislature did a huge investigation in 1960, and they grilled some employees of the very first electronic machines that were being used, and back then they explained how they rigged the vote on them. So, I mean, this is nothing new, but we are really getting down to crunch time for the freedom of this country, and we are not going to turn anything around until we get these people out of office. Sir?
You said the 17th Amendment was never ratified?
No. A lot of people don't know that when Bill Benson did the 16th Amendment, he did the 17th at the same time. The fraud is far worse on the 17th than the 16th, and as a matter of fact, I went to the State Archives. I live up in Sacramento, only 10 minutes from downtown. The State Archivists are wonderful people. I'm a total geek because I love the State Archives. But about 4 hours I came back. They had dug all of the journals out on the 17th Amendment, and these are the handwritten journals. And the day that it was voted on, the handwritten tally the votes was ripped out, and they were in shock because nobody had looked at it for 50 years. But the state of California actually jumped the gun. See, the Secretary of State didn't send the amendment here till 1910, but in 1909 they changed the election code to vote for senators, realized they jumped the gun, sent it back, nullified that law, and waited for the fraudulent vote to take place. As a matter of fact, I just wrote my column for WorldNet Daily yesterday. It's called Checkmate. You might want to check it out because there's a link to it, to the brief that Jeffrey Dickstein, the last brief. Bill Benson's in a big fight right now. The feds are trying to shut him down. The legal brief is in there. Jeff Dickstein did it brilliantly. He was Joe Bannister's attorney. The reason I called my column Checkmate is because the feds are trying to prosecute Bill, make him shut down his website because they say what he's preaching about the 16th Amendment isn't true, that it was ratified. In Dickstein's brilliant legal brief, he turns the table on them and says, in order for you to prevail, you must prove he's wrong, and he has the 17,000 certified court documents to prove he's right. Checkmate. So the feds have been sitting on this brief for the last 4 or 5 months because I think they stepped in it so deep this time they don't know what to do to get out. Stan sitting here. Yeah.
Sorry, could voter names be published and then maybe compared, who voted and like actual registered voters, somebody could actually compare the names?
I don't know that they need to purge the voter rolls in the county clerks in every county. They just need to do that. They need to go through them and have proof of citizenship that is verifiable. And candidates need to audit their vote, even if you're running for the water board, school board. All of do you know how many of these seats go unchallenged or are empty? Look at Phil Hart, who wrote Constitutional Income. Do you have any? Up in Idaho. There was no Republican who was going to run against the Democrat. So he decided to register, and he did, and the Democrats didn't even put up an opponent against him because they were busy worried about something else, and he went in just like that. He's now a member of the state legislature up there. So, I mean, if this is a government of and by and for we the people, then we have to start filling those offices. And I know I have to get done here. You can cut me off anytime.
Don't you worry, I will.
The felons you mentioned, are they felons in prison, or are they felons out of prison?
Out of prison. But they are, under the laws in the states, they're not allowed to, they lose their voting rights.
Well, how do they get it?
How do they get what?
The right to vote again.
I guess they'd have to petition the state legislatures to change the laws. See, and the other thing, too, about the state legislatures versus the federal, the Constitution does, specify about elections and ages and things like that. But all the rest of this rigmarole, I had to pay to get on the ballot. $1,700, and this was back in 1994. So my only qualification for representing those people in the 2nd District was if I had enough money to get on the ballot. Why? Because they want to keep the citizen candidates off the ballot. The Constitution only says that a member of the House of Representatives has to be 35. And at that time, I just barely made the cut. But that wasn't a qualification. The only thing that qualified me in the state of California was the bucks. And if you want to run for U.S. Senate, which of course you shouldn't be doing because there is no law that allows you to do that, but it's something like $4,500. So you see, these guys in the legislature, they control everything. And we're trying to get some of these people out. But of course it becomes more and more difficult because the machines just, want to crush everybody. But it's the actual vote. I do believe we could get rid of more of these people in the legislature if we had an honest vote count. Not so much in Los Angeles and these areas like that, because there are so many illegals on the voting rolls. I go to Los Angeles frequently to visit my daughter, and I'm telling you, it's a war zone down there. It's really, really bad. So, in any event, yeah, I'm sorry.
The presidential level.
That's another, see here we have the problem. I'm all for third parties, even though there's more than 60 registered political parties in the United States. They, for some reason, want to call them third parties. But for presidential, I voted for Michael Pruka. I'm proud of it. They say, oh, your vote's wasted. I'm not going to, vote for evil. I don't care. It's my personal decision. But it's the Electoral College that elects the president. And the 54 Electoral College votes in California are controlled by the Republicans and the Democrats. And in all honesty, before November of 2008, if we make it that far, and there is some bad stuff on the horizon, the third party, or a Constitution party, do you really think that out of the 110 million registered Republicans and Democrats, that you're going to get 80 million of them to go register as Constitution Party or Libertarian or whatever? It's not going to happen. And those Electoral College delegate votes, unfortunately, are probably going to go to the next prince in line to, destroy this country. People that belong to the two main parties, they need to clean up their own parties. They need to go to your central committee meetings. They're very important. See, I learned all this when I ran for Congress. You go to those central committee meetings and you pound on them. These are the people that choose who gets shoved down your throat for governor and for your state legislator. That is the machine, and at the local level goes to the higher level, goes to the higher level. And I truly was sickened when I attended these meetings, because I tried to give these people the truth and what the issue should be. They didn't care. They only cared about climbing the political ladder. Which one of these big wigs down in L.A. they were going to impress clear up in little agricultural Chico, California? But they don't care. But the party is you, the people. If you're registered with a political party, they need you. You really don't need them. And that's what you have to make clear to them. Clean up the corruption in your own parties, or nothing's going to change,
Devvy speaks with passion because she believes. And the only way we're going to turn this around if there are enough people who really care.